Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
So, on our Thursday Dialogue this morning, we are discussing the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. It's a bill that could review U.S.-South Africa relations and even potentially impose sanctions on senior ANC officials. So what has happened this week is that the bill has cleared its first legislative hurdle when it was passed by the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Tuesday in a 34-16 vote. But it still has a long way to go. But the fact that the bill was elevated from committee to Congress is quite an important development. It's advanced from committee to Congress. Now the House will have to vote. If it passes in the House, it goes to the Senate. If it passes in the Senate, after intense debate, then it goes to the President for his signature. But there's still questions about whether or not there is broad partisan support. And I would like you to give us a call on 011-883-0702. Share your thoughts with us about what you think of this bill. What do you make of this decision that this committee in the U.S., the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the decision that it's taken now? And do you think that there are chances? I mean, it's very difficult to pass a law. Do you think there are chances that this bill will be passed there in the House and in the Senate? I'm interested in your thought. And what you think is behind this? I mean, where is South Africa as well in all of this? This is such a crucial moment. We are dealing with a 30% tariff that's been slapped to us or on us by the United States, the president of the U.S., Donald Trump. Are we negotiating? Are we in Washington, D.C.? We are now dealing with a bill that could potentially pass, should it, of course, go through successfully the House and the Senate. Is there anybody in Washington, D.C. from Pretoria who is trying to negotiate and speak with the Trump administration or even congressmen and women to try and explain our position? I wonder. It looks like the only people that are talking are the ones who want this bill passed. So there's this strategic communications vacuum that exists here. And I don't know if you've picked up the same thing. There's a strategic communications vacuum. We're told that we have an envoy, but we're asking deeper questions about where this envoy is and whether or not his credentials have actually been, the credentials have been accepted by the U.S., then we are told, well, this person has been working behind the scenes. I'm sorry, if you're going to appoint an envoy, they're not an advisor who can just sit here in Pretoria or in Sandton in South Africa and do the background work. Envoys actually go. He's supposed to be in DC, but is he there? Has he even been there so far since his appointment? So let me know your thoughts. But what's happening with this bill basically is it directs the U.S. government to reevaluate diplomatic, trade, and military ties with South Africa. And what they've cited, those who want it and are pushing for it, they're citing South Africa's recent engagements with global powers such as Russia, China, Iran, you name it, as well as the controversial interactions, quote unquote, with Hamas. It also seeks to identify the South African government officials and ANC leaders eligible for sanctions. In fact, the committee chair, Brian Must, said that the ANC's direct engagement with Hamas leaders and the country's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice are further proof of worsening relations between South Africa and the U.S. In fact, do we have those clips, Abel, from that committee in the United States? I just want to start off with those. This is what happened in the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the U.S. on Tuesday as this bill was making its way from committee now to Congress.
I want to voice my strong support for H.R. 2633, the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. This is a targeted and overdue response to troubling shifts in South Africa's foreign policy under the African National Congress. Let me be clear that this bill is not anti-South Africa. It is pro-accountability. For too long, we've watched a key partner drift closer to authoritarian regimes, conducting joint military drills with Russia, strengthening economic and cybersecurity ties with the Kremlin and Beijing, and aligning with efforts to de-dollarize the global economy. These actions raise serious questions about the ANC's alignment with the democratic values and U.S. interests. Even more alarming has been South Africa's posture following the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. The ANC's refusal to acknowledge those atrocities, its direct engagement with Hamas leadership, and its politicized case against Israel at the ICJ reflects a government that has turned away from principle and from its traditional role as a bridge between the global South and democratic norms. South Africa or any nation cannot conduct themselves in such a manner and expect the same quality of relationship with the United States of America.
So that's what they said. But there were other congressmen who disagreed with this bill.
President Trump has already disproportionately targeted South Africa. He's done this by trying to embarrass President Ramaphosa and the Oval Office with faulty evidence of purported atrocities in the country. By instituting an executive order cutting all U.S. assistance to the country and putting it in a place where special refugee resettlement programs for Afrikaners. And at the same time, he's blocking the resettlement of literally all other refugees to the United States. Refugees fleeing genocide in Sudan, not allowed. Refugees fleeing Russian bombardments in Ukraine, not allowed. Refugees fleeing political persecution in Venezuela, not allowed. This is glaring hypocrisy. And I do not believe Congress should further enable or double down on President Trump's misguided approach.
So that's what the Democrats were saying in response to this bill. Where do you stand and where do you think this is going to go? I recorded an interview this morning with David Smith, who is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for The Guardian newspaper in Washington, D.C. We pre-recorded it earlier because he is currently sleeping right now. Because it's very early in the US now. So he stayed up until like 1 a.m. so that we can pre-record the conversation. So I wanted to just lay the foundation first before we bring in analysts, someone in the US who deals with these lawmakers, who has been observing some of these bills that are being introduced and brought to the House, just so we get an understanding of, is there bipartisan support? And what do we understand as well around the people who are pushing for these bills? So here's that conversation we recorded this morning. David, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the passing of this bill in the Foreign Affairs Committee, does that suggest that some Democrats have also turned, showing a changing sentiment of sorts towards South Africa?
Well, notably, when this first came up in the previous Congress, there was a Democrat, Jared Moskowitz from Florida, who co-sponsored this bill. So that's not entirely new, but I think most Democrats would still be opposed to it. This is being driven by Republicans, notably a strong Donald Trump ally, Congressman Ronny Jackson, and he welcomed this bill getting through this particular committee, but there's still a long way to go in terms of a vote on it in the full House of Representatives and in the Senate. It would also require presidential approval, and worth remembering, some votes like this that come out of committee never actually go before the full House. So this is far from a done deal.
Okay, and we'll talk about the process that then follows next. But from what you've seen so far, is there broad bipartisan support?
No, I think certainly Republicans are fully backing this. Democrats, I think, regard it as a bit of a stunt, and they're aware of Donald Trump's hostility to South Africa. They criticized the so-called refugees who came to the US and the idea behind that. They certainly objected to the way Trump ambushed South African President Cyril Ramaphosa in the Oval Office. But of course, Republicans do control the majority here, so they could pass this bill with no Democratic votes or just a few.
Yeah. So this gentleman, this congressman from Texas, Ronny Jackson, I mean, it's not the first time that he's called for consequences for South Africa's relationship with China, Russia, and Iran. Who is he? What do we know about him in as far as his interests in South Africa are concerned? Does he have any links to Apex? And I'm asking this in the context of the US's position on South Africa's position on the war in the Middle East and the decision, of course, to take Israel to the ICJ.
No, sorry, Ronny Jackson has a very interesting background. He was best known as the White House doctor, and I remember going to a press briefing years ago where Ronny Jackson was telling us Donald Trump was almost superhuman in his great health, and if he ate a better diet, he would live to 200 years old. He made his name with that and went on to run for Congress as a very pro-Trump candidate, and he got elected to a seat in Texas. And since then, Jackson has been a staunch supporter of both Trump and indeed Israel. In 23-24, the biggest donor to Ronny Jackson was the American Israel Public Affairs Committee with nearly $30,000. That's a very powerful lobby group. And in January this year, just after Trump took office, Jackson was named as the co-chair of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. So I think it's therefore not a great surprise that he is targeting South Africa over its perceived opposition to Israel.
So what are you seeing there in Washington, D.C., in as far as the presence of South Africa is concerned? Because it almost feels like there's a strategic communications vacuum. You've got Republicans, some of them that are trying to push this bill to the House and the Senate. You've got these 30% tariffs that are facing us from the 1st of August. And one wonders if we have our government officials here that are coming to Washington, D.C. What have you seen so far? Because it looks like the people speaking now are people who want to see such bills pass through. And I wonder if there's work being done there in D.C. What's your sense?
I agree, it does appear lopsided. If the South African government is lobbying hard on Capitol Hill, it must be doing so very quietly and behind the scenes, because I have not witnessed much of that. And just to give an example, the other day, Donald Trump let rip his views on BRICS and how he regards it as a foe of the United States in many ways. He was particularly irked by suggestions that maybe BRICS would try to downgrade the US dollar in terms of the world's reserve currency. And there was no clear pushback on that at all. And indeed, on this forthcoming bill and other criticisms, there seems to be silence. I just know in my own personal experience, the South African embassy, which has a prominent location in Washington near some other embassies, doesn't make a big splash. And a seemingly trivial example, when all the embassies in Washington have open days where members of the public can visit, the South African one, in my experience, has often been closed and empty and not taking part in that. All of that said, Cyril Ramaphosa and his delegation did obviously get that meeting with Trump a few weeks ago. That is more than many other foreign leaders have managed. I think he handled it fairly skillfully and had FaceTime with Trump and put the South African case. So that was certainly better than nothing. But in the meantime, it seems to be left to allies of South Africa, such as Congressman Jonathan Jackson, a Democrat, and others, to provide the pushback here without a great deal of strength from South Africa itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the time where we should be silent. It's such a critical, crucial moment. We need to be there, making sure that we do meetings, we do negotiations. Yeah, David Smith, thank you so much for making time for us. He's the Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for The Guardian.
Your voice,
Your questions.
your morning radio with Clement Manyathela.
This is 702.
23 minutes after 11 o'clock. I've got analysts that are going to help us navigate. Perhaps, like, what is the criteria for sanctions? Is it all about morality? Is it all about the foreign policy that our country has pushed for? What are the circumstances where we've seen America implement sanctions? And what are the circumstances under which they have lifted those sanctions? I mentioned Syria not so long ago. So there have been movements where Donald Trump would lift some sanctions, and they do that for quote-unquote strategic purposes. So I've got some analysts I've invited who will speak to us about that and what could be the potential consequences should this bill go through to the House, to the Senate, and get the signature of the president. I want to hear from you, though, now. On 011-883-0702. You can send us a WhatsApp voice note as well on 072-702-1702. What are your thoughts on this development?
Good morning, Clement and 702 listeners. I think our embassy in the U.S. is closed and should be closed because the U.S. is not willing to listen to the government officials. It has interest in listening to lobby group AfriForum and those guys that do so. I think people must not waste time trying to appease the US and Trump. They must rather start looking for alternatives. The tariffs are coming our way, regardless of what we are going to do. So maybe they should be spending time looking for alternative markets for our products instead of running to the US. That's how I feel. Thank you.
Good morning, Clement. This bill by USA to sanction one of some of the ANC members is actually an attack on South Africa. Whoever is going to celebrate that, like the DA, don't understand and realize that it's actually an attack on our government as a whole and an attack on our country. So what I suggest is that we return the favor. We also sanction starting with Donald Trump and some of the leaders in America for their hand in Palestine, of being complicit in genocide in Palestine. So until we do something to Americans, they will keep on coming. It's like not pushing back at the bully. They will always come and they'll always come. We have to do something against America. There must be something. We can't just always bend over and then we just take it like that. Not anymore.
Yeah, except this bully probably has an explosive in his hands, to use that metaphor. And if you dare touch him, the consequences are going to be severe on your part. I mean, imagine South Africa sanctions the U.S. president. Are you kidding me? You know, we would get, I'm sure the tariffs would be 98% by this evening. So immediately after that decision is taken to sanction him for whatever, I bet you he's going to go on his Truth Social and he's going to post. And that's how South Africa is going to find out that, oh my goodness, we're facing tariffs of up to 99%. I think we need to know who are we dealing with here. I don't think that as a country we need to subject ourselves to that level of bullying. I mean, can we have some self-respect? We're a sovereign state. Countries are always going to differ on foreign policy, on different positions. But we need to at least give each other the courtesy of respect. There's so many things that I'm sure our government disagrees with the US on. But do you see them going out and trying to punish the US for those positions they take? No, they respect that. Well, that's where you are. In fact, if anything, the best way to do it is to do it diplomatically. But that's not what we are seeing here. So do we submit ourselves to the bullying and do whatever the US wants? Or do we actually stand our ground as a sovereign state while negotiating diplomatically and trying to find a common ground with the United States? Because they need us, we need them. More of your WhatsApps.
Hi, Clement. This is Sele here. I think the U.S.-South Africa relations matter is quite complicated because we, as South Africans, have to decide whether we want to save South Africa from this, and I think we should, or whether we want to save state-captured suspects, and I don't think we should. So, in other words, we shouldn't be we pushed into a false sense of patriotism by saving criminals instead of saving South Africa. We need to save South Africa. We need to position South Africa in a stronger way with America and other parts of the world, but we shouldn't be saving criminals who have done so much harm to our country.
Clement, the chickens have come home to roost as far as the ANC is concerned. There are issues. There have always been issues. And I think that it's easy to say, yes, we must close our embassy in the USA and the tariffs are coming anyway and we should deal with it. But you know what? It's going to hurt the poor people in this country, the people that can't afford it. Rich people, they can deal with it. It's the poor people that are going to get hurt. And the ANC just does not care. They have not cared from day one, other than the cadres and the senior government officials and the president himself. And the sooner the population realizes that the problem's not the US, the problem is the ANC politicians. That's where the problem is. The sooner this country will be sorted out. We cannot afford what's going on now. And yet, the ANC just carries on down the same path, down to oblivion.
Is the problem only here? Like, I don't know if the US doesn't take any ounce of accountability here. I mean, one of the things that the congressman mentioned and justified this bill that they're trying to push to the House and to the Senate is that we have taken Israel to the International Criminal Court. Like, why are you trying to punish a country for taking a stance like that where they're seeing children are dying in Gaza? Innocent people are being killed. Children, women and children in Gaza. Thousands of them dead. And South Africa says, man, this is not okay. Let's go to court. And then you want to punish South Africa for doing that. So as much as there are many mistakes the ANC has made, many things I don't even agree with, I don't think this just falls on them. I don't think this falls on this government alone. I think we're dealing here with other dynamics that are at play when you're dealing with global politics. And that includes other powerful countries that are going to use their power and their might and their influence to push for what they want to see in the global order. It's 11:31.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
Aibo, apparently code 10 is for people who can't drive. That is not true. Aibo, I think we drive better. People who get code 8 can't even park. Please, I've seen it. I've really seen it. All right, 19 minutes now before 12 o'clock. Let's continue with our conversation on our Thursday dialogue about this U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. It's a bill that could review U.S.-South Africa relations and potentially impose sanctions on senior ANC officials. We're talking about it now because it has now been elevated. It's been advanced from committee to Congress now. The House will have to vote. The Senate will have to vote. If it passes in the House, if it passes in the Senate, it goes to President Trump for his signature. But there are still questions around whether there is broad bipartisan support. But what is important now as a development is that this bill was elevated from committee to Congress. We've got Professor Christopher Isike, who is a professor of African politics and international relations at the University of Pretoria. Professor Hennie Strydom, who is a professor of international law at the University of Johannesburg, also joins us on the line. Professor Isike and Professor Strydom, thanks to both of you for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to the listeners.
Thank you so much for making time for us. Professor Isike, let me start with you. Can this bill actually go all the way? Because what we've seen in the past is that some of the people who put up these bills actually were sort of used as proxies. There are people who've got interests about our government and the positions they're taking, whether it's the ICJ, and they use some of these congressmen to, start making noise about this bill so that it also maybe rattles feathers here in South Africa. How do you assess it? Do you think that now that it's passed this hurdle from committee to Congress, there are chances that it may go all the way?
Well, look, like you said, it's a tool that the U.S. uses, and it's not the first time we are seeing this kind of bill from particularly Ronny Jackson himself. But the difference between then and now, when he did it last under Biden, was that you had a President Biden who viewed South Africa a bit more favorably compared to President Trump. And right now, with the way that Trump has influence over both houses, and both houses are now run by Republicans, it is really difficult to say what will happen. I am sure that it will pass through the Congress, because all they require there is a majority votes. So once that scales through, if it comes to Senate, the Senate has majority, but there may be people in Senate on the Republican side that may not be given to it. And right now, because of the polarization between both parties, you see all of them voting in block for or against proposals made by one or the other. So it's really difficult to say whether this will not pass through the Senate unless the Democrats stand strong in using the filibuster to frustrate it. Because the reason why I'm talking like this is that there are people on both sides of both parties that have affinities with Israel, and Israel is a sticking point for both these individuals. So where they may not agree on Russia or China or Trump's approach to South Africa, they may be sympathetic with the Israeli issue, and that may tilt them to want to support that. So I'm not so sure that the Democrats in the Senate, or even in the House of Representatives for that matter, will be together to say, well, let's negotiate, let's do dialogue with South Africa, rather than taking this hard stance, this punitive measure, as some of them have described it.
Yeah. Professor Strydom, what action does this development require from the South African government? Because I was saying earlier that it looks like the only people speaking now are people who want to see this bill passed. I spoke to a reporter who's in Washington, D.C. and says, I hardly ever hear that there are some South African government officials here that are talking to congressmen or congresswomen, and I wonder, is there a strategic communications vacuum here? What should we be doing to respond to this development by the U.S., if anything at all?
It's rather difficult at this point in time to decide what to do, because once the bill is passed and becomes law, as I understand it, there will still be some kind of investigation and review of the relationship between South Africa and the United States. And once all the evidence has been gathered, then I think at that point in time we can expect something more concrete about the nature of the sanctions and the scope of it. But let me just generally speak about the type of sanctions that usually are considered in cases of this kind.
Yes, please.
Yeah, normally it's sort of, aims at putting in place travel bans and the seizure of assets, as well as the blocking of certain financial transactions. The latter one, I think, is the more far-reaching when it is imposed, and if it is imposed, because that is circulated through the whole banking industry in the world. So banks, normally when they get information about individuals that will be sanctioned, as far as certain financial transactions are concerned, they run a sort of reputational risk to facilitate those transactions. And the tendency of banks is to be very wary about it and to block transactions or to refuse to become involved in it. So, but that is just generally speaking. We have to wait and see what will be the concrete outcome once the investigation has been completed.
Yeah. Professor Isike, what is the role of the president's envoy at this point? And do you think he's still needed? Are we at a point where we should just be accepting that the relations have broken? And what does that look like? Because does that then mean we don't care much what comes our way? Because I do feel like if the US, for instance, says 40% tariffs, like, do we not try and negotiate with them diplomatically? Because that's going to have an impact on South Africans, on our economy. So what do we do now? And at what point do we just accept these relations are broken and there's not so much we can do to convince the US otherwise?
Yeah, I don't think it's... Sorry.
Oh, just one second. Yeah, Professor Isike. Yes, for you,
okay.
sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really like this question. It's a very important question to ask because you can't keep being pushed up and down without looking at the big picture, having an end in sight, a big plan. The problem here is that we are dealing with a very erratic U.S. administration at the moment. For example, Trump may not necessarily punish South Africa for cozying up to Russia because he himself is an admirer of Putin in Russia. But Senate members like Marco Rubio, former senator, who's now Secretary of State, and other Senate members, and across both parties, we view South Africa's relationship with Russia very, very seriously. So there are different issues here. Now, to answer your question more directly, the U.S. is a very important power globally and market for South Africa. There are many advantages, benefits that South Africa gets from its relationship with the U.S. Economically, even apart from, the AGOA, for example, right? So it will be useful for South Africa because it cannot go toe-to-toe with the U.S. on many of these issues to continue to use every arsenal it has to try and get a reasonable deal. I mean, the only challenge is that the U.S. is dealing with its bad faith, right? Take the example of the 30% tariffs that was recently reeled out. This is in spite of the fact that there's an ongoing discussion between South Africa and the U.S. based on the deal that was presented to President Trump in the Oval Office in May, right? While that is going on the side, you turn around and then issue a 30% tariffs. And that tells me that you're either a bad faith player or there are other things you are looking at, and BRICS could be part of that. So my thinking is that South Africa should keep using every channel, every avenue to try and get the U.S. to reason, but also start thinking about an exit point, because there's a point to which you push someone to the wall, and if the person can't break through the wall, they have to either resist or they have to capitulate or they have to simply ignore you. And I think ignoring them and taking the beating for the next 3 years or so may be a better option, because if you have a new president in the White House, whether Republican or Senate, so long as it's not a MAGA-affiliated individual, then all of this will become history at that time.
Professor Strydom, what does an exit point look like for us as South Africa?
Well, I don't know, because, we sort of, they're still moving in a very gray area. I think at the moment South Africa should consider its options, whatever they might be. And given its relationships with BRICS and so on, and taking into account that it's very speculative to consider, exactly what the Trump administration is going to do. But at least they must start thinking about the possibility when it goes down south and it becomes very bad and irreparable, that there is an exit strategy, whatever that might be. The second issue is not to act now in a way that will fuel the fires, and to be very wary of that. I think it's a time now for restraint, for cool heads, and to look at the situation objectively. and follow the developments that will be unfolding over the next couple of weeks or months.
Yeah. Professor Hennie Strydom and Professor Christopher Isike, appreciate your insights this morning. It's 8 minutes before 12.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
It's now 6 minutes before 12 o'clock. Let's wrap up with your WhatsApps.
Morning, Clement and Muhammad here. I just like to say we poor people are already suffering. I don't think anything for us will matter for the US. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Clement. Yeah, about the issue of sanction to certain members of government and ANC. Yes, as much the ANC has caused more damage to our country, but we must be very careful as citizens, because remember how it started in Zimbabwe, this issue of sanctions, and who are the people who are suffering on the ground? It's the poorest of the poor. So we must be very careful, as much as we understand the damage that is done by ANC government. But the US to go further to impose sanction, those sanctions are not going to affect directly those individuals that they are targeting. It will go further by have a negative impact to us as citizens on the ground. So we must be very careful about this. I hope government and our diplomat can handle this issue with very conscious and try to engage. Yes, we must not surrender to the bully, but we must try to manage in terms of crisis like this. It's going to be 5 years, and it's going to be over, and then you see another new leadership that is going to take over. Thank you.
Hello, Clement Mapari, report. Regarding the previous caller, he said if they sanction fellow members, it's an attack on South Africa. Not really, though. ANC members, not really, though. If you are complaining about people being corrupt, and then they get sanctioned by America, how is South Africa being attacked? It doesn't make sense, man. It doesn't make sense. Let's just say, for an example, they sanctioned Balula for an example. How is South Africa not benefiting? Because we were not benefiting even if when we were not being sanctioned. So,
Hi, Clement. This is Vernon from Joburg. This has nothing to do with the ANC. There's everything to do, one, with South African foreign policy, because we align ourselves with BRICS, and number two, because we took Israel to the ICC. So what these people don't realize about us as the voters, we cannot be blackmailed into doing something. All they are doing now is letting everyone double down in voting for ANC, EFF or MK. So yeah, it's not gonna work.